Dr. Anderson mentioned. In Black Labor, White Wealth, by the way, that's what we're reading. We're reading Black Labor, White Wealth. You can get a copy at powernomics.com on page 114, where he's talking about how Europe went from being very weak economically to being very strong. So let's just be clear. I think it's very clear, very important for you to understand that Europe was not doing well before the Kendall says, Dr. Boyce, you may not want to talk about spades. Oh, you were there. Yeah, it was a bloodbath. Yeah, well, you know what? We changed the rule on spades next year, by the way. You will be able to pick your partner. I told them, I said, I like the guy I played with, but we were not on the same page. We didn't go to the same college. I'll tell you that. And so anyway, but I can't blame him. I got to blame myself. But anyway, so let's dig back into this. So one of the things that was mentioned earlier in terms of how the Europeans were able to acquire so much wealth from Africa was one thing that they did. And I really want to stick to this point and make it relevant to something that's happening right now, is if you look at page 113, there's that part that really stuck out to me where he says, by the latter part of the 15th century, West Africa's great trading markets had been closed down by Arab invaders, and its great university centers were under the control of Arab scholars. So that's a twofold, that's a double whammy, right? This is how you conquer a people. And this is still relevant today. I want to actually reference this when it comes to, say, our HBCUs, right? Because right now, Howard University, as you know, is having some interesting stuff going on with the kids living in tent cities and all this other stuff. Kamala Harris, was talking all about Howard last year when she was trying to run for office, but now she hasn't said a word about Howard, right? I guess it's not convenient anymore. They have all these so-called celebrity faculty, Black people that were put on TV. I love Phylicia Rashard. Don't get me wrong. Love Phylicia. Love the Cosby Show, right? You have Phylicia Rashard. You have Ta-Nehisi Coates. You have Nicole Hannah-Jones. All good people. All people that seem to mean well, but they haven't said a word about any of this. They haven't talked about what the students are going through or anything. I find that just so baffling. But here's the point. This is why, this is what I'm connecting to today's universities and HBCUs. Is if you pay attention to this sentence, read it very carefully. By the latter part of the 15th century, West Africa's great trading markets had been closed down by Arab invaders, and its great university centers were under the control of Arab scholars. That is part of the key of how they gained control of Africa, right? Number one, they shut them down economically, and they colonized them educationally, right? So one, I cut off your ability. Parallel this to what they do to Black people to this day. Right? They do the same thing to this day. If they want a Black person to get in line, if they want to silence you, they shut you down economically. And then also they love controlling the educational process so they can control what you think and what your children think and what ideas you are exposed to. And that even expands into social media, where you see a lot of censorship, where if you have an idea that doesn't fit the mainstream, they define that as misinformation, right? So because they know that a lot of people are now getting their education from social media. So effectively, when I think about HBCUs in particular, I don't hate HBCUs. I think HBCUs are a lot of fun. It sounds like it's a great experience. I never got to attend when I wanted to. I couldn't. But I remember when I wanted to go teach at Howard, and I was interviewed to teach at Howard, I was interviewed by a Chinese man. And I was like, why is this Chinese man interviewing me to decide if I should have the right to talk to African Americans about finance? I talk to 1 million Black people a week, at least. Nobody needs to tell me that I'm qualified to talk to my own people, right? Especially not somebody who's Chinese, right? And I've told you all this story, right? And so what that said, that led me to go into a deeper investigation in our HBCUs. And I remember I went to go to, I believe it was North Carolina Central. I said North Carolina A&T. I meant to say North Carolina Central. And I'll never forget them telling me that they did not have one single African-American male professor in the entire business school. And I said, but wait a minute, you're making all this money with African-American students, but you don't have one single African-American male that is in control of what's going into the brains of these students. So effectively, what you've done, unfortunately, is some would say that you have commodified Black people, that you've made Black people into a commodity, a cash cow. I'm going to make money off these Negroes, but the Negroes ain't going to make money off nobody, not even off themselves, right? Like seriously, like I don't even, I mean, because I want you to understand the difference between an institution that is filled with Black people versus an institution that is run by Black people. If you go to a chicken farm is full of chickens, but there is no chicken running the chicken farm. The chickens are the commodities that allow the people who are running the farm to actually make money. So Black people are the chickens on the farm in so many of these institutions, including many of our HBCUs. So HBCUs like Howard and whatnot, they're great schools to go to. And they do have some African American faculty there. I'm not saying that they don't have any. But I remember also in areas like computer science, I know Black computer scientists who have told me they have trouble getting opportunities to teach at HBCUs. I know a guy named Juan something. Juan, I don't remember his last name, but Juan had he ran a lab where he would produce all these PhDs in computer science. And he said, a lot of times I can't get HBCUs to hire my Black graduates, right? So effectively, this old tradition, this 500, 600-year-old tradition of someone else controlling the economics and the education of Black people is something that continues to this day. Black people really don't have a university that's truly under our control. I think Howard University is a great prototype because here you have this Black school with this Black president, which, by the way, he's not African American. I think Wayne Fredericks is from another country, but I got to double check. You also have these Black celebrity professors, Phylicia Rashard, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Nicole Hannah-Jones. Not one of them has a single word to say about what's happening at the bottom of that ladder. The students that are somehow inspired to go and pay all this money to go to that school are living in moldy dorms. They're complaining at the top of their lungs. They're screaming out to the world for help because the people that are truly in control of the institution are at least giving the impression that they couldn't care less about their well-being and what they're going through, right? So I would say that this is a microcosm of how Black people have been commodified for a very long time. If you go to a lot of white universities, for example, what you'll find there is they'll have some Black students that they admit. Every school has its diversity programs or whatever, and then you'll have a lot of Black athletes, commodities, right? USC, for example, USC will always admit Black people who can dribble basketballs and throw footballs because they can make millions of dollars from those Black people. But then when you go to the areas where Black people can't be commodified, where Blackness is no longer profitable, you suddenly start seeing the numbers thin out. You go to the biology lab, and I bet you they don't have one single Black biology professor, or if they do, maybe they have one and that's it. Maybe one or two max, right? Out of like 80 or 100, in the science labs, right? And so, or if you look at the higher rungs of these institutions in terms of how they're run, you might see, and I saw this at Syracuse University. When I was at Syracuse, I remember that I was the first African American ever hired in the history of the finance department at Syracuse. They had never actually given a promotion to any Black man or Black woman in the history of that department. I searched the whole campus. I think they maybe had a couple of African American faculty out of like hundreds and hundreds of faculty. And many of the African American faculty on the campus were all put in the same little corner. They called it the ghettoization of faculty, where they would have them all in like African American studies. And what would happen is that when you're marginalized in that way, you're not really sort of in the middle of campus deciding what the students are going to learn and how they're going to be taught. So effectively, what you have to be very careful about when it comes to the economics and the educational processes of your community is that, one, you have to control the economics and the education. You must do that. You must be the dominant educational force in the minds of your children. Two, you must have an economic model that allows you some sort of security from those who might try to use that to control you or to exploit you. Black people to this day are shut out of the nation's economy. Every election, we're voting on all these symbolic, superficial issues. Nobody's talking about things like why Black businesses can't get a loan, or when these students graduate from HBCUs. I thought about that and I said, why is it so easy for them to get $100,000 in student loans, but they can't even get $30,000 in business loans? Why are you giving them student loans but won't give them business loans? And then you go into the broader economy, they'll give you auto loans all day, but won't give you a loan to go start a business. So they'll give you as much debt as you want to go buy a commodity that does not benefit you. They'll give you as much debt as you desire to go buy something that is profitable for them. But they won't give you access to the debt or to the capital if you're trying to create something that is profitable for you. So pay attention to that. That's a very big deal. And so what you're seeing here on Dr. Claude Anderson's book, Black Labor, White Wealth, on page 113, is when he talks about how the Arab invaders shut down West Africa's trading markets, right? So we're going to cut off their money, right? So that they need our money. Now we got them broken, begging, and borrowing. Right, that's where a lot of Black folks are to this day. We broke and begging and borrowing. Master, please give me a job. I don't know how to start no business. Master, I need to go to your neighborhood. I need to work for your company. I need to go to your university so I can learn. And then the second thing they did was they took control of the great universities that were controlled by Africans. So Africans were educating Africans, and then the Arabs came in and the Europeans came in and said, we're going to control your university. So we're going to decide what poison we want to put into the brains of your kids, right? So we're going to keep them divided. We're going to keep them enslaved. We're going to do all these things. And that's exactly what they do to this day. Like the game of colonialism hasn't changed because all colonialism is pimping. That's it. Pimping has been around for 100,000 years. I was watching a real interesting, I wasn't watching, I was actually reading a real interesting article about how when they made the movie The Mac, where they continuously promote that black exploitation culture, even to this day, they did it back in the 70s, and they were talking about how there was a battle when they were shooting The Mac over territory between, there was a gangster there, I forgot his name, who controlled half of Oakland, and the Black Panthers controlled the other half, and they had this big battle over shooting this movie in each other's territory, and the Black Panthers said, you got to pay us money to shoot the movie in our territory, whatever. Not that matters, that's kind of irrelevant, but it's but when I think about the Mac and you think about pimping and you think about controlling a resource for your own financial benefit and engaging in specific acts to maintain control, that's all this is. Like basically Black people, the reason you don't feel powerful is because you're completely and totally pimped. So in order for you to get away from that, a good place to start would be to pay attention to how Africa got pimped in the beginning by the Arabs and by the Europeans. They pimped them by, one, shutting down their money. If you can't make money anywhere else, then we get to control you because we decide if you have resources or not. And two, controlling the education. I talked to a young lady today who wants to come and work. She was at the All Black National Convention. Her name was Allison, and she sells waist trainers for women. Like apparently these waist trainers are really selling big. And this young lady, 31 years old, makes about $3 million a year, $2 to $3 million a year selling these waist trainers, right? And I was super proud of her. And she came to the convention and spoke, and I talked to her. And one of the things that I remember her mentioning, I think her boyfriend was there, and he said something like, I think he said, what did he say? I think he said something like, she and her friends make all their own money, so they don't have to go and sleep around with older men to get their money, right? So what he was basically saying is that because she had her own money, now she gets to choose men on her own terms. She's not choosing a man because I can't pay the bills, right? Because that's a whole nother level of control. That's a whole different frequency you have to operate on. She says, look, I got plenty of money. I probably make more money than him. She has to pick on different criteria, right? So having access to your own money, controlling your own resources allows you to operate on a different frequency from somebody who's borrowing and begging and scraping by trying to survive. And so when I think about Howard University, and I'm utterly baffled by the fact that the HBCUs, as wired as they are into white supremacy, as wired as they are, I'm sure the president, Wayne Fredericks, can get on the phone and call people at the White House. I'm sure he's got, the CEO of Merrill Lynch on speed dial. I'm sure Barack Obama has run through that campus many times. I'm trying to understand, if you have all that access to the white man's nipple milk, why in the hell are your students begging and borrowing and scraping it and living like bums? Why is it that when I talk to Howard graduates from the 1980s, they literally, when I told them what was going on, many of them said, "Oh man, they're still doing that. The students still have to go through that." Yeah, it was like that. It was like that back when I was in school in '92. I'm like, oh my God. So you gotta process this for a minute, right? This is one of the reasons why when you hear people, brilliant Black men and women like Nuri Muhammad and others, explain the importance of Black economic independence, what they're saying is that dependence is very comfortable, right? Getting on that man's nipple, it's safe, it feels safe, it's easy, right? The butter biscuits are always warm and delicious. But when you take the butter biscuits, when you get up under his wing and you're sitting on his nipple milk, you are going to be at the bottom of the barrel. You are going to be the least respected of the entire group. The students at Georgetown University right down the street, their students aren't living in tent cities. You know, the students over at George Washington University, they don't have moldy dorms. I've met my wife at Indiana University. When they had a mold problem, they shut down the whole campus until they fixed it, right? It's because they took it that seriously. But at Howard, I mean, you're supposed to be the elite among the elite. Think about this, right? Like, this is the pride and joy. It's like, hey, you, right? Whatever, right? And I get that, right? I respect that completely. But are you telling me that Black people in America are so pathetically disrespected by others and by ourselves that when you take the best that we got, our creme de la creme, they're still living like bums? They're still, I mean, process that for a minute. I mean, if that's not a white supremacist message, I don't know what is. Like, that's about as white supremacist as you get. That literally, when your absolute best looks like their absolute worst, your elite institutions look like community colleges, that really says that you need a different system and probably need a different model. And so, you know, what I see is the Black folks that still want to be wired in. They still like to know that they've got Joe Biden on speed dial. They like, you know, knowing that Kamala Harris wore chucks and pearls and visited Howard, you know, in order to become vice president, even though she's not even responding to the crisis that they're having right now. That's fine, but that does not work. And that has not ever worked. That's my point. That hasn't worked, right? In terms of helping Black people to achieve the kind of power that allows you to engage in the very basic act of protecting and defending your children. In order for Howard or any HBCU to have the ability to truly empower Black people, you have to do it in a way where you release yourself from these other systems that maintain you and create systems that are controlled by you, that allow you to achieve a higher level of prosperity. It's like when I was working for the white man, when I had a job, my income was only going to go as high as they decided it was going to be. I was only going to get to go as high up the ladder as they decided I was going to go. When I left the job and created independent economic systems, I was then able to go to the level that I wanted to go, right? And then not only did I have the ability to make the money I wanted to make, but I had the ability to create jobs for a lot of other people. Do you understand? So I think Howard, and I'm not really talking about Howard anymore, right? Howard's going to do what Howard's going to do. They'll probably keep doing the same thing. 30 years from now, there'll be students in the year 2060 or something, or 2050, who are also complaining about moldy dorms, who live in tent cities, right? Like, it's not going to change, right? If you go back 30 years, they had the same problem 30 years ago. They probably had the same problem 30 years before that. They're going to have the same problem 30 years from now, right? So I'm not asking Howard to be a different university. What I am saying is I'm asking Black people to become a different kind of community. I'm asking Black people to understand the dynamics of what you're witnessing here, so that you'll understand that as we develop our own educational apparatus and our own economic systems, we structure them in such a way that we can engage in the basic act of taking care of our own, right? There's nothing at any university that, you know, that's out there that you can't learn from a lot of Black people in your own community, right? Sure, professional licenses, you know, to be a dentist or a lawyer, yeah, you got to go to these schools or whatever. But if you're talking about just flat out education and knowledge, do you know how many knowledgeable Black people there are in the community? You know, at this convention, that was a university, man. I mean, we had all the PhDs. We had the lawyers. We had the medical doctors on stage. We had the scientists. We had the people that had all kinds of knowledge on everything from relationships to health to all kinds of stuff. So what makes you think that you need other people in order for you to learn? It's white supremacy, in my view, that taught us that we need to go and pay a lot of our money to people that are not even from this country or white folks in order to learn. You know, so that's what I'm seeing here, and I really think that that we have to overcome this. in order to overcome white supremacy. And also, if I were to advise Howard or students of Howard, I'm not even talking to the administrators. They're a little bit too gone. They're a little bit too wired in. Wayne Fredericks, the president. I don't know what planet this guy's from, to be honest with you. I don't get him at all. And he's not African American, so maybe he just doesn't understand certain things, and that's fine. He's a hardworking guy, he's very smart, but I don't see him as one of us, to be honest with you. I really don't. But when you talk to the students who are still idealistic enough to believe that a better future can be created, I encourage them to dismantle all those old systems, sort of tear down everything that you've been led to believe about what it means to be successful as a Black person and build something better. It starts with these very basic ideas. It's what we call in the Black Business School, we call this the Black Core of Three. The Black Core of Three is this: by any means necessary, Black people must educate our own children, create our own jobs, and support Black businesses. That means you must have your own independent educational system, your own independent economic system, and you must support those who are within that system. Right? That's it. If you do that, that's going to really change. That'll create a whole different roadmap for Black power and Black success. Right? So that's what I see with Howard, because I really just don't get it. If you're like the fancy bougie Negroes, you shouldn't be living in mold. Like you're living like rats and roaches right now. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to be mean, and I probably sound mean. When I talk, I piss people off. I'm gonna go places. I go places sometimes, and they're scared to talk to me, and maybe they can talk back and say bad things about me. I don't know, but I don't know. And I hope you understand what I'm saying. That this is just a microcosmic reminder of the kind of disrespect that Black people experience all over this society and all over this economy. Okay, so as long as you're under another man's roof, you're always going to lose. Period. So anyway, let me move on. I'm reading on page 114. Dr. Claude Anderson's book, Black Labor, White Wealth. And let me see here. So one thing he talks about is Europeans and how Europeans became so strong from African wealth. And he says it was no mere coincidence that in the latter part of the 15th century, Europe began recovering from centuries of poverty, while Africa was increasingly exploited of its mineral wealth and human capital. As millions of Africans were being kidnapped and sold into slavery around the world, slavery became a simple mechanism by which the wealth of Africa and Blacks could be transferred to Europe. Displacement of African wealth was so massive during the 1500s and 1600s that socioeconomic and political upheavals resulted. I think I read some of this. Let me jump forward. So here's another part where he talks about Africa being drained of resources and human capital. Through the centuries, Europeans espoused ethnocentric doctrines that encouraged a total and complete exploitation of Africa's natural resources and human capital. By the late 1800s, massive and concerted exploitation had taken its toll. The wealth power gap between European nations and African nations had widened so much that European nations were no longer fearful of Africa and felt that they could invade and exploit her at its will, at will. In 1885, pay attention now, this is how they chop you up. This is how they divide you and split you up. Remember, I told you Black people are a commodity, including at HBCUs, right? Remember, that's why a lot of HBCUs are full of Black students. But if you go into the science labs and the business schools, you'll see teachers from other countries and China and Africa and other. Well, Africa is almost okay, right? But it's not the same as African American. I think African Americans deserve preference in African American schools. But then you'll see from India. I interviewed at Kentucky State University. Well, actually, I went there to speak. I didn't interview. I went there to give a speech. And I sat with a guy who was teaching finance who was from Italy. And I remember noticing that this Italian guy teaching at an HBCU talked about those students like they were absolute dirt. Like, I was really fascinated by how he said he felt comfortable, I guess because I was a finance PhD like him, he felt comfortable literally talking about these students like they were the dumbest sons of bitches on the planet. And I couldn't believe it, and this is when my eyes kind of started opening up in terms of understanding how Black people are commodified. So anyway, let me keep going. So the wealth power gap between European nations and African nations had widened. In 1885, European nations met at a conference in Berlin, and without notifying any African nations, drew lines on a map to divide the African continent among themselves. Shortly thereafter, European nations established colonies throughout Africa. They colonized 90% of the African continent and controlled nearly 100% of its wealth. Only Liberia, an American colony, and Ethiopia were uncolonized at that time. In the mid-1960s, some Black African nations were restored to independence, but not because white European nations had developed a moral conscience or no longer needed to exploit Africa and its people. Instead, European nations freed the African nations because they had acquired most of their wealth and power and now felt that they could control those nations just as effectively from the outside. So basically, they just kind of let them go because they said, okay, we used you up, like a $2 hooker. And now we're going to move on to the next one. And that really speaks to the history of capitalism in general. This is why I'm not a pure capitalist. I believe in free enterprise and business and all that. But I'm not. Capitalism is a very interesting ideology, very problematic in a lot of ways. And what it kind of does is it's just like a fat kid who just goes from like room to room eating all the food in the room. And once it's done eating everything in one room, he goes to another one and another one. So once they're done sucking the life out of one country or whatever, they just move to the next one. And you see this there's a lot of manifestations of this. And Black people, again, when you are defenseless, when you don't understand the importance of maintaining various forms of educational, economic, psychological, spiritual, and social sovereignty. Sovereignty does not mean that you control everything. Sovereignty just means you control your own shit, right? You control your own neighborhoods. You control your own family. In my family, I have sovereignty. You can't come in my house and just do any old thing. When you don't maintain that sovereignty, then others come along and they exploit you. So we could go down the list. I'm going to go down the list and name 3 to 5 things just off the dome that are done to Black people, similar to what they did to the Africans, where they exploit the hell out of you, and it explains why you have no wealth. Number 1, we just talked about HBCUs and white-owned universities. Most Black college students can't get off the ground economically because they're too buried under student loan debt. Not only do they have too much student loan debt, more than they can ever repay in a lifetime, they also have no skills whatsoever when it comes to starting their own businesses or learning how to make their own money in an independent fashion. Additionally, because workers' wages continuously decline, you've got all this debt saddled on your back, but the inability to repay it, they basically have made a lot of Black college students into educated sharecroppers. Sharecroppers are people that in which the debt level basically creates a scenario where you are an economic slave, because you have to work for life. You have to work until you're dead, because the debt is so big that you'll never repay it in your lifetime and actually have a positive net worth. That's one example where they exploit you until the point that they drain you. Then when they're done using you up, they move on. What's another area where they suck you dry and then leave you for dead? Politics. Every election, you have all the mostly Democratic Party politicians. Republicans try to do it, but the Democrats are more successful at it, that will show up wherever Black people are and will pop in and, feed you whatever bullshit they got to feed you to get you to come vote, right? Souls to the polls, booties to the polls, chucks and pearls, whatever they got to do, right, to get you to vote, make any promise, tell you any lie, whatever, right? Kamala Harris was all about Howard University a year ago when she's trying to get elected. She ain't said nothing about Howard since then, right? So they suck you dry, get all your political support, and then when the election's over, you're sitting there looking stupid again, saying, dang, y'all didn't do none of the stuff you promised to do, right? Which is really amazing to me, because it's like you're falling for that remember Eddie Murphy, Beverly Hills Cop, banana in the tailpipe line? Like, you fall for the banana in the tailpipe every time. Or like Charlie Brown. Remember Charlie Brown? Lucy used to say, come on, Charlie Brown, kick the ball. And he'd say, I'm not going to kick the ball, because every time I kick it, you move it. And she's like, no, really, this time I'm going to hold it. And so Charlie Brown, he's like, are you serious? She's like, yeah, just trust me. So she'll put the little ball up, and he'll run, and he really thinks this time is going to be different. And he runs to kick the ball, and she moves the ball every time, and he flips 10 times in the air and lands and cracks his head open, right? So that's what Black people do, and it's utterly fascinating to me. I don't know if it's because people have short memories, or people are just that stupid, or people are just that emotional. I don't know what it is, but it's just fascinating, right? So that's another area. What's another area they exploit you? The prison system, the prison industrial complex was designed and shaped in a way that it allowed slavery to continue by another name. Ava DuVernay, shout out to her. She did a good job. I think it's called the 13th Amendment or something like that, or the 13th, that documentary she did, where she explained how the 13th Amendment abolish slavery unless you've been convicted of a crime, which basically means if I can relabel you, if I can find some way to label you as a criminal, then I can make you into a slave, and that's perfectly legal. So it's just basically a loophole. That's all it was. That's 3. What's another one? Let's see, number 4. Public schools, the public school system. You have a lot of Black-owned public schools. Some schools are even run by some Black people, which is really interesting, like Baltimore and stuff like that, where the Black kids are not being educated, they're not being loved. It's a straight school-to-prison pipeline, but they need those kids in that school so that the administrators can make their money, because the administrators get federal funds based on how many Black kids they corral like sheep and like chickens headed for slaughter into these schools, so they can just sit around and pretend to educate them and feed them a bunch of Eurocentric nonsense, a bunch of LGBT crap or whatever. But don't even teach them how to read, write, and do math. But the kid comes out knowing, all kinds of stuff about transgender and all this other stuff, right? So it doesn't just allow for the economic exploitation, but it does that double whammy that the Arabs did on the Africans, where you're not just economically benefiting from them now, but you're also educationally programming them so that there'll be a consistent revenue stream for you for life, right? So you're training them to do things like go to college and go deep in debt, and they're also being trained to leave college and go work for a white person, which is the 5th area where you're exploited. I'm just naming 5. I could keep going. I could probably name about 9 or 10 actually. If you talk about like stores set up by foreigners in black neighborhoods, how the Asians control the entire hair care market, right? Black women will spend their last dollar on hair, and Asians are getting all that money. You can talk about athletes. The NCAA has taken billions of dollars out of the Black community by taking our best athletes. And then the really big one that people don't pay attention to is all the millions of Black people that we train, even at HBCUs, to go work for white people. This helped me understand why I can understand at first why white people would create HBCUs in the first place. You don't love Black people that much. Why did John Howard, a white man, create Howard University in the first place? Why would white people fund the education of Black people? Well, you fund it because the education isn't really an education. It's really more of an indoctrination. You're preparing them to feed into the white-controlled capitalist economic system by training them to become workers, right? And this is not just a specific racial kind of classification. They do this to everybody. They do this to poor white people too, right? I went to Indiana University to visit. That's where I met my wife. And I remember I was walking through the business school, and I saw some sign that said, this building was donated. It's a brand new, beautiful building. Probably cost $200 million or something. And they said this building was donated by Eli Lilly. And I was thinking, like, why would Eli Lilly give all that money just to build a building on campus? Well, because Eli Lilly had an agreement. Well, you train your students so that when they graduate, they can come work for us. And it's not always an exploitative deal, right? There are companies out there that treat their workers decently well. There are some careers that can feel somewhat fulfilling, right? I'm not here to say to you that if you work for a white company that you're a loser and that you're worthless and that you're a complete idiot. No, I'm not saying that at all. But y'all know that the number one complainers about racism and microaggression and the stress and anxiety of race are typically the corporate Negroes who go to work every day. And because you got that master's degree or that bachelor's degree from Brown, you think that the rules are going to change for you because you're now an educated Negro and you've done everything you can to properly assimilate into the culture, but you're still different. You're still treated differently. And then to make things worse, you're trapped because they tricked you into pouring all of your energy into learning one specific skill. If I get you to put all your energy into training yourself to do nothing but serve me, then I have all the power. You're no different from that lady in Eddie Murphy's movie. Remember Coming to America when the guy said, so what do you like? And she said, whatever you like. So what have you done with your time in your, what have you done up until this point in your life? I've been getting prepared for you, right? Remember, she was like, this lady, this beautiful woman who could pull in every man within a 100-mile radius, and she was fine, had thrown all that out the window to allow herself to be trained for one purpose, to be with him and to serve him, and that's it. So when he rejects her, she's dejected. You saw the sequel, but 30 years later, she's still messed on the head because she dedicated her whole life for one specific purpose, and then that purpose got taken away, so she had nothing. So the same thing happens to a Black person when all you've ever been trained to do is work for white people. Right? It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with that. You can do that if you want to, but I'm saying maybe you need to have a plan B. Or when you see a kid who spent his whole life preparing to be a basketball player, and the NBA ain't got nothing. They hire maybe about 40 dudes a year, right? Out of about 50,000 applicants, right? They're gonna pick about 40 or 50. Like, you know, so when you can't play basketball, you feel like your life has no sense of purpose. I saw this guy. There was a guy named Vince Young, who was a really great quarterback. He won the championship, the NCAA championship. I think he played at the University of Texas. And I saw this cover. He was the man. He was 2006, I think. Anybody remember Vince Young? He was the man at that time. And Vince Young was, he had just won the NCAA championship, and they had him on the cover of ESPN, the magazine. And on the cover, he literally said something like, "I was born to play quarterback at the University of Texas." And at that moment, I felt so sorry for him. I felt so sorry for him. I said, if they ever take football away from this guy, he will have nothing. He's going to wish he was dead because he has nothing else except football, right? And years later, he played for the Texans. If y'all remember, I thought Vince was going to do better than he did in the NFL. He did okay for a while, and then things kind of started going downhill. And he was about to lose his job or something. And anybody remember? Look up Vince Young and suicide. He was on like a suicide watch for a little bit because they're about to cut him from the team, and he drove off in his car and they thought he was going to go kill himself, right? And I thought back to when I saw him on that cover when he was the man, and he was saying, "I was born to play quarterback at the University of Texas." So ultimately, you have to be real careful when somebody boxes you in. And this isn't just for like athletes or regular people. Even scholars get caught in that trap. When I was in academia, you have no idea how hard it is to get a PhD, especially in finance. It is hard as shit. I mean, I was sitting next to some of the smartest people in the world. Imagine studying 8, 9, 10 hours a day and still failing your test. Like, that's how crazy it was. It was really the most difficult thing I ever did in my life. After I accomplished that, everything else is easy. Like debating people on the internet is like a joke to me. Like, because I've been in really intense situations. And I remember noticing how many brilliant Black people there are in academia who are really trained really well to do like one thing, right? One little tiny niche of research, and that's it. And they're only prepared to go teach at a university. They can't do anything else because you've been trained to be a one-trick pony, a one-dimensional animal. And that is a huge violation of one of the most fundamental and basic rules of investing, right? There's nothing you'll invest ever in your life that's more important than your life, right? You can invest money and lose money and gain it back. But when you invest your life into something, that's a hell of a risk you're taking, right? And one of the rules of investing is that you diversify, right? Thank you, Anthony. I see you put diversification, right? You don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, they train you to put all your eggs in one basket. You are trained with one skill for one job, and if you don't have that job, then you're done. Or if they blackball you, like you're a professor and they blackball you from academia, you can't do anything. And I was really fascinated by the fact that you had people that are some of the smartest people I've ever seen in my life who really were convinced that all they could ever do was teach students at a big white university. Come on, man. Like, there's nothing else you can do. Like, there's no other skills that you have, right? So ultimately, a big control mechanism that is used by any abuser. Abusers use this method, not just white supremacy. White supremacy is like a really abusive boyfriend, right? One thing an abuser does, and pay attention, ladies, this is important for you to understand, is abusers will isolate you so that you have no other options, right? Abusers will, take a woman that has a lot of support from family and say, "Hey, baby, let's move to Alaska," right? I got this job in Alaska. If you love me, you'll come with me to Alaska. So now you're isolated in Alaska. And then he'll say, "I want you to stay home and take care of the kids. I don't want you to go to work. Just depend on me," right? So now you got 3 of his kids. You ain't got no source of income. You have no family support. And then that day he punches you in the eye. You end the relationship because you ain't got nowhere to go and you have nobody to call. You have no backup, no support, no nothing, right? So abusers tend to, just like pimps, just like Anybody that exploits another party, they tend to look for people that don't have options so you can maintain control. That's what pimps do. That's a common thing. So you got to be really careful about that, because white supremacy is designed to isolate you where you have no other choices, right? So what I'm simply saying to you is, I'm not saying separate. I'm not telling you like you can't do business with white people, or you can't or do reverse integration. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying keep your options open. That's it. That's it. Options have value. This is not just me saying this. This is actually true. In the options theory, the first thing we learn when we study option pricing theory, how stock options are priced, first thing they teach you is that options have a non-negative value, meaning that anytime you have an option, that's something that could have value. Options are always valuable. So always keep your options open. When you train your kids, sure, go work for people, do whatever you want to do, but every black child should know how to start their own business. Every black child should own shares of stock. Every black child should understand the ownership of real estate. Every black child should understand the importance of having multiple streams of income, because when you have other options, then you are in a stronger bargaining position than when you have no other options available to you. So if you're a person living paycheck to paycheck with one skill, with one job, and no other backup plan, you're going to pretty much be stuck and pretty much be done. Okay. So let me keep going. Let me read more. And let me mention to you, by the way, some of you were asking about the the recordings to the convention and stuff at the convention. We're going to redo the convention, except we're going to do it digitally. We're going to actually I'm having my team arrange to bring in every single panel and all the panelists, and we're going to bring them on a platform. We created a platform called All Black Digital, allblackdigital.com. We're going to redo the whole convention there so that all the experts can kind of really flesh out their views, because we only have a certain amount of time at the convention, a certain amount of space. And so you go to allblackdigital.com if you want to sign up there. And also a recording of the entire convention will be there. So I think the team's almost got that loaded already. So if you log in at allblackdigital.com, you can see everything from the except for not every single breakout. Not every breakout was recorded, but we got a bunch of them, and every single big panel. Also, of course, that epic performance and the gala and all that stuff. You got to check out Infinity Song. If you haven't seen them, I give them a lot of credit for creating the positive energy that existed in the building. So feel free to go to allblackdigital.com if that's of interest to you. All right, so let me read a little bit more to you. Natural Resource Wealth. This is page 115, Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson. Remember, Christmas is coming. Powernomics.com is where his books are. So feel free to go to powernomics.com. And Tiffany, I see you're asking about the price. I don't remember. So just if you go to allblackdigital.com, it's right there. I can't remember what price they put on it, but feel free to join that. And that's our way of kind of stretching the convention out, so we can just sort of do this all year round. Okay. All right. So natural resource wealth that Europeans acquired from Africa whetted their appetite for the finer things in life. Most European nations wanted gold and silver because these metals were needed for coins, but moreover, they represented the new mark of wealth. These precious metals were more useful than land because they could buy anything anywhere. Thoughts of gold, jewels, and spices from foreign lands stimulated investment in trade as merchant and gentry classes pressed their governments to secure new markets. Competing monarchies in Spain, France, Portugal, and England were willing to gamble lives and newfound wealth on finding more precious metals and spices in the New World. Adventurers such as Christopher Columbus accepted the challenges from his financial backers and made several fortune-hunting trips to the New World. On his second trip, Columbus promised the Spanish crown that in return for financial help, he would bring them, quote, as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. So he promised them gold and slaves. 17 ships and hundreds of men were provided for his second voyage to the New World. To further encourage his success, the crown promised Columbus 10% of the profits, a governorship over any new lands and fame. So what does that mean? That means that they promised him a 10% equity stake. So that's ownership, right? That's why, again, if you want to be wealthy, get ownership. You must own something, right? Don't measure Black economic success by how much money you make. Who cares how much money you make? I want to know what do you own? If you transition your income into ownership, then you're winning. If your income is spent, then it's a waste. You might as well never made the money in the first place. But they also gave him power through the governorship and also any new land. So they gave him land. Land is valuable. There's a big movement in the Black community right now to acquire tons and tons of land. Down in Georgia, there's a couple groups, Brother Ben X and Jay Morrison and some others are literally acquiring hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, right? So land, and then they mention fame. I mean, fame is just for the ego. So Columbus and his military contingency arrived in the Caribbean islands and made inquiries about the location of gold. After only a few pieces of gold were found, Columbus expanded his search to all the islands, traveling as far as Haiti. He used his military advantage to conscript the peaceful, unarmed Arawak Indians into his massive gold search. As the search became futile, angry Europeans took out their frustrations on the defenseless Indians. Many were killed and mutilated. Other Arawaks were driven to commit suicide. Within 2 years, nearly half of the 250,000 Indians in Haiti were dead. By the year 1515, there were 50,000 Arawak Indians. By 1550, only 500 remained. Howard Zinn said that a report in 1650 showed that none of the original Arawaks or their descendants were left. Damn, these people were brutal. Failing to find a significant amount of gold, Columbus attempted to at least keep his promise to the crown regarding slaves. He selected 500 of the strongest male and female Indians and shipped them back to Europe for servitude, but nearly all of them died en route or shortly thereafter due to climate and temperature differences between their Caribbean homeland and the European continent. Now, like the elusive Bahamian gold, an entire race of Arawak Indians did not exist. So he wiped them all out, 95% of them out, and then he enslaved the rest, and the slaves did not survive. That's pretty evil. The Americas become an extension of Africa. Following Columbus's exploration of the New World, onto the New World, a new sense of European nationalism developed. European nations competitively explored South and Central America and the Caribbean islands in search of gold and other precious metals. When these resources were discovered, small contingencies of European whites colonized the areas in hopes of producing wealth in the name of their motherland. But European whites were allegedly physically incapable of doing the laborious work, and the Indians had been killed off. As a result, black slaves became the chosen tools for producing wealth in the Caribbean and throughout the Americas. So black people were selected for slavery because you are strong, right? That's what he's basically saying. Black slaves were needed in the plantation fields of the Caribbean, the tobacco fields of the Piedmont, and the mines of South America. It was the massive influx and dominance of black slaves in mining and agriculture production that directly linked black enslavement to Europeans' increased wealth and power in industrialization. So he says that so mining and agricultural production were the primary ways that they were able to extract their wealth and make Europe into the richest continent on earth. Organized religions joined hands with governments in the race to capture wealth in the New World. They merged, searching for lost souls and lost gold. In the early 1500s, high officials in the Catholic Church designated African blacks as the primary instrument of mining wealth for whites in South and Central America because Indians were killed off by the rigorous labor and European diseases. Blacks were perceived as being physically more durable and expendable. Portuguese and Spanish slave traders moved into high gear, buying, selling, and shuttling black slaves across the Atlantic Ocean. More than 90% of Africa's kidnapped blacks were shipped to South America and the Caribbean islands. Between 1600 and 1800, black slaves outnumbered the white Europeans entering the Americas. Up until 1820, blacks outnumbered Europeans transported across the Atlantic by a ratio of 3 to 1. Most were settled in Brazil, given it the largest black population outside of the African continent. If you ever want to understand white oppression in a different light, in a more insane light, go study what they're doing to the black people in Brazil. It's worse than what they're doing here. In my view, it's unbelievable. They literally just hiding those people. It's the craziest thing in the world. These black slaves and their descendants were Brazil's dominant population until the great mass of European white immigrants arrived in the 1880s, long after slavery had been terminated and European wealth and power had been amassed. These new white immigrants arrived to reap the fruits created by forced black labor. A century later, the descendants of Brazil's black slaves are still excluded from enjoying the fruits and are so impoverished that death squads murder the hordes of black street children who scavenge for food. So they have death squads that kill the children in Brazil, black children in Brazil. I can just tell you, this is something worth looking into, right? When he's making this point about immigration and how immigration policy is used to dilute the black population. That's exactly what they're doing in America. That's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly, I mean, when they bring in all these people from Afghanistan and give them all this money, people from south of the border, give them all this money, people from Europe, give them all this money, their goal is to continuously dilute you. And so, you know, in every election, you know, when you're supporting these open borders and they're not letting in people who support you, you're kind of voting to dilute your own vote. That's what it is. So wealth production in the Americas, this is page 117, this is at the bottom, read a little bit more and then we're going to be done for tonight. It says, Portuguese and Spanish colonization of the Americas represented the first systematic and concerted effort by European nations to use African blacks as the main instrument for accruing wealth. From the 1500s to the 1880s, their long-distance trade policies and practices were based on profits from Africa and her dark peoples. The high profits caused black enslavement to be known as the Golden Harvest. The economies of South and Central America and the Caribbean islands were based on products made by Africans. Black labor spawned numerous cottage industries that provided Europe with a constant flow of sugar, tobacco, molasses, vinegar, rum, and precious metals. These products significantly changed Europeans' consumer appetites and demands. Black slaves produced a phenomenal amount of wealth for slave traders, settlers, and European nations. In the South American and West Indian markets, slaves drew an average sale price of $500 in the 17th to 18th centuries. When this figure is multiplied by the 10 to 15 million black slaves that historian Howard Zinn estimated were transported to the Americas, the revenue from one-time only sales would amount to more than $1 trillion in today's currency. $1 trillion. African slaves were typically sold at least twice before reaching their final destination. As a matter of practice, most of the black slaves brought into the Caribbean markets typically were seasoned, then resold into slave markets in South, Central, and North America at much higher prices and profits. By the 16th century, European powers sought mineral wealth in Africa and Latin America using what they perceived to be the best possible mining equipment, black slave labor. Mines in Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil initially used local Indian labor, but these groups proved to be especially susceptible when confronted by various European diseases, hard work, and rigorous discipline. A royal ordinance in 1503 officially sanctioned introducing black slaves into the Spanish colonies to replace the Indians. Between 1501 and 1700, nearly 4 million black slaves were exported to Latin America, and the profits of their labor filled various European treasuries. By the 1660s, slaves in Latin American mines had exported $536 million, 536 million ducats to Spanish treasuries. At today's value, these gold and silver ducats would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Near the end of the 17th century, Europe's holdings of gold had increased by 20%, and its total stock of silver tripled. France had also amassed an abundance of new precious metals from Brazilian mines. The wealth power produced by black slave trading in the Americas intensified competition between European nations. Spain became one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful nations when it pushed Portugal out of the slave trade and mining in Latin America. Between 1550 and 1600, the amount of silver shipped into Spanish treasuries quadrupled. Kings Philip III and IV used the revenues to militarily protect and acquire more slaves. Much of Spain's new wealth was passed into neighboring nations in order to repay Italian and German merchants who had financed many of Spain's trade wars to the Americas. Although Spanish, Portuguese, and other European nations disagreed over who should possess wealth produced by slaves in the Americas, there was little, if any, disagreement over which racial group would be the labor force used to produce the wealth. So what this really tells you is, you know, when Congress says that we have to study reparations, that's a joke and that's a lie. That's a complete joke and it's a complete lie. They ain't got to study nothing. just literally in the last 5 minutes, I've read enough for you to hopefully be convinced and to understand. And this is Dr. Anderson's work. Black Labor, White Wealth is the name of the book. It's at powernomics.com. I have read enough that hopefully you understand that black people are one of, if not the most dominant wealth producing force in the history of this entire hemisphere. Not just the United States, but you go south of the border and black people were producing damn near all the wealth, you know. And so for anybody to almost act like this is a surprise or the fact that people don't know about it, that pretty much means that, you know, in today's terminology, in terms of concrete steps we must take right now as a people, concrete solutions, let's be solution oriented. You've got to take over the educational process for your children. You must. Give me a yes in the chat if you confirm that you will do this. You must make sure that your children are learning these things, you know, on a regular basis. You got to talk to them about this stuff. You know, I know people talk about critical race theory, and I think all that's important. I'm not against critical race theory at all. I'm not here to judge that debate. But I don't think critical race theory, I don't think there's a lecture that can be given by, you know, some Africana studies scholar, the ones that I know anyway, that is going to really dig into it the way this does. Like, this really digs into not just sort of talking about how much our feelings were hurt by slavery, right? Sure, yeah, we went through a lot of trauma that should be discussed, but this is talking about the hardcore economics. Like you owe us money, and so if you want to know why I take a very hardcore position in every election, my response is very basic. I'm like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. Remember that? F you, pay me. You know, well, what about blah, 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 blah? No, F you, pay me. Well, what about Donald Trump? Blah, blah, blah. F you, pay me. Well, police are killing black people. This is F you, pay me. Black Lives Matter. F you, pay me. I don't need all of that. Cut the check, period. That's it. Let's just pay the money, and we'll talk about all that stuff afterward. All the after we all get our money and we get our land and we have our property, then we can sit down and have a conversation about all the other stuff. But you got to start with the money, because one of the things that I believe, and I think you can at least see validity in this argument here. It doesn't mean I'm right, because you may see a different point of view, and I respect that. But one of the things that I think we understand pretty clearly is that if your economics ain't right, then nothing else. It's hard to make anything else right. Like when I told you all about the young lady who came to the convention. Her name was Allison, and she's selling these waist trainers, and she's making millions of dollars a year. This was liberating for her, right? It changed everything. It changed how she felt about herself. It changed how she engaged with men, what kinds of relationships she picked. It took a lot of stress away, right? And so ultimately, when you own and control resources, it kind of solves a lot of those other problems, right? And what I noticed with the paternalism, particularly of white liberals, they're very paternalistic, almost like they almost feel like they're our parents, is that when we say we want to solve a problem, what they tend to respond with is, well, we will kind of solve your problem for you as long as you let us control everything. Like if you say, I need to get to the store so I can get some food, they say, sure, I'll drive you halfway to the store in my car, right? And that's fine. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to drive me halfway to the store in your car, but I want to own the damn car. And I want to decide that I'm going to drive myself all the way to the store. You can stay home. I don't even need you to be in the car. You don't need to be there. There's no reason for you to be there, right? I want to own the car. I'm going to drive where I want. You don't even got to be in the equation. You know, so understand that that's, you know, because what happens is they'll say something like, we're going to create better schools for black people. I don't need you to create better schools for black people. I want you to give us a few $1 billion so that we can go create better schools for black people. We have the models. If anybody's ever visited the Muhammad University of Islam in Chicago, you will see that they are educating 12-year-olds like college students. If anybody goes to Freedom Home Academy International, they will know that Marcus Klein is educating, 14-year-olds to do the work that graduate students can't do, right? These models are out there. The problem you have is that they're underfunded. And they're underfunded because the people that feed you a bunch of fluff are not actually giving you access to the capital. If you get access to the capital, everything changes. That's a complete game changer at that point. So F you, pay me. I'm Joe Pesci. I don't want to hear nothing else. I don't want to have no other conversations until you cut the check. You cut the check, then we can talk about me voting for you. You got to deliver first, right? One of the dumbest things, I'm going to tell you this, and then I'm going to let you all go. One of the dumbest things that they said, I got a call from Ice Cube during the whole election thing. And I remember one of the dumbest things that they said to him that made me laugh was when he laid out, according to his contract with Black America, and he wrote it with a bunch of experts. He didn't write it by himself. He wrote it with a bunch of experts. And and he laid out his demands for black people in exchange for political support. You know what they said? They said, well, how about we talk about this after the election, right? Just get everybody to vote and we'll talk about it after the election. And we just laughed because that's a sucker's that's a sucker deal. Like how stupid do you think we are that we would literally give you what you want first and then hope that you give us what we want when we know that you're a liar, right? And they're proving that they lie, right? They're proving this, right? They're not doing any of these things, right? So ultimately, I think that you have to have that political will. If white folks want to be involved, if they want to help, cut the damn check. I don't need your education. I don't need you civilizing me. I don't need you to tell me that Black Lives Matter. So I don't need your self-esteem. I don't need anything from you except for the money you owe me. And I really don't even need that. I think we could actually do well without that. But getting that would actually make things a lot easier. Like if I had an extra $100 million, with no strings attached, I could literally educate the entire Black community with $100 million. I swear to God, I could literally ensure that every Black child that wants a thorough economic education got it. If I was able to raise $100 million, I kid you not, I could do that nationwide, all across America, because the models, Black people, we're magical in that way. Like you go back to I pay attention to what the ancestors did, and I think about the ancestors that came out of slavery, and they created Simmons College in Kentucky, and they had no money, no support, no nothing, no resources, no government contracts, none of that. And they literally were just like, okay, we're going to get some buildings. We're going to educate our kids. And they ended up producing tons and tons of Black people that had college educations and medical degrees and everything else, right? What shut them down was integration. What shut them down was when white folks basically said, you can come sit next to us. We abandoned all of our own institutions, and you cannot do that. So you must own and control things if you want to have real power in America. If you own and control nothing, then you have no power, period. All you have is the perception. You have the false perception of power. When you are a person that owns nothing, but you think you're powerful, you're like the babysitter who thinks that you're a parent. You're not a parent, you're a babysitter. You're an economic babysitter. And most of our universities, even our HBCUs, unfortunately, like Howard University, they don't produce economic parents that can give birth to possibilities and opportunities for Black people. They produce economic babysitters who simply are trained to go manage resources for white people. So you get the fancy position, you're the VP at Merrill Lynch. That ain't your money, that's Merrill Lynch's money. Those aren't your assets, that's Merrill Lynch's assets. You can't hire a goddamn soul at Merrill Lynch without asking your boss for permission. So stop pretending like you have real power if you can't change the lives of Black people. If you are a Black person who's going through life saying, I just want somebody to give me an opportunity, then that means you have not acquired power. The day you acquire power is when you are a Black person who says, who can I bless today? Who can I give an opportunity to today? Right? That's when you go from being economically strong and stable to actually being a person who is a kingmaker. The kings and the queens don't really actually have the power. It's the king makers and the queen makers that actually have the real power. People that can create jobs for other people become king makers. They're like economic gods. So what I'm really talking to you guys about right now, and I hope you trust me when I say these things to you. I hope that you'll hear my voice. If you heard nothing else that I said tonight, I want you to hear this one thing. If you have kids, I need you to listen to some of what I'm saying to you, because my number one goal in my life before I grow old and die is to prepare you and to teach you to turn your children into economic gods. Economic gods have the ability to manifest. They're not walking around like, I don't go through life every day thinking, God, I wish somebody would give me an opportunity. Who gonna give me an opportunity today? I don't do that. I don't even think that way. I meet people and I say, I'm gonna give you a shot. Let me put you on a platform. Let me help you out. Let me invest in you, right? Let me give you a job. Let me give you an opportunity. Right? That's literally how I'm thinking. I don't sit around saying, God, I hope CNN calls me today to give me an opportunity. I hope that doesn't even cross my brain. Right? And so I want your children, and I want millions of our children to understand that level of power. It's not that hard to accomplish if you understand the formula. The formula is to get rid of all the garbage that they're teaching you about how to be a good slave and learn how to just simply play the economic game above the rim. If your child is is if you've been investing for your child since they're young. We talk about that in the $5 a day stock investment program. I'm not going to reiterate that, but you can go to theallblackagenda.com if you want to take a look. Theallblackagenda.com. It's right there. The ebook is free. It's totally free. So you invest for your child from the time they're little. They then have resources to work with. 2, you give them economic training in the 3 key areas of wealth: how to start a business, how to invest, and how to own real estate. And then next, you just simply make sure that they know who the hell they are. You give them their self-esteem, right? You root them in something. When we were at the convention, Victory Boyd, who was part of Infinity Song, she sang a song that you can go look up. It's called Who We Are. I believe it's called Who We Are. And the lyrics of the song, this should be the Black National Anthem. I love this song. And the lyrics are something like, this is who we are. This is where I came from. These are my people. This is my struggle. Right. So the reason that song, I love that song. First time I heard the song, I actually cried. I love that song because that's what distinguishes her from a lot of other artists. I met Victory before she got signed, but right when she got signed by Roc Nation. That's when I met Victory. Her father brought her to one of our events. And the reason her father brought her is he said, my daughter is a great performer. She's going to be a big star one day. And I need her to know who she is. So I need her to be, my kids to be consistently exposed to some of these ideas so that when they go off into the world, they can always remember who they are. They know where home base is, right? And so now she's super famous, right? She's doing all these great things. She sang in front of the best at the Kennedy Center and, and all that, like whatever, right? Big superstars. But here's the thing, right? When she went down to sing for the NFL in the season opener in front of millions of people, and they offered her all kinds of money, and they told her, to go do this jab thing, and she didn't want to do it, she had no problem walking away from that, right? So when you have kids that are born with a type of integrity where they simply know who they are, what's happened is that not only have you given them the resources to defend themselves and the training to know how to protect and build those resources, you've also given them enough of a sense of self that somebody can't come along and manipulate them by giving them little buttery comments, right? Like for example, a little girl who's never been told that she's pretty will literally go and do all kinds of horrible things for dirty ass men who simply tell her things that her father should have told her when she was a baby, right? Because she never learned that she was beautiful, she'll fall victim to anybody that tells her that she's cute, right? So effectively, when you make sure your kids know who they are, that gives them the courage to stand on the platform, scream from the highest mountain, and stand up for themselves, for their community, for their people, and not feel the need to budge no matter what. We need more sturdy people in our community. We don't need more famous Negroes. We got plenty of those. We don't need more Black politicians. We got thousands of those. We don't need more Negroes in high places. We got a lot of those. We need sturdy people who just know who they are, who can simply say, I respect whatever you do, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something different because where I come from, we do it in a different way. Because if you want to know why I stand up here, and I've talked to millions of people now, but literally my YouTube channels have gotten about 300 million views up until this point, right? If you want to know why I can sit here and talk to everybody and about anything and say whatever comes out of my mouth and not feel bad about it, it's because I just know who I am. Right? It's not the intellectual part. Sure, I've learned a lot of stuff and I know a lot of things, but I'm completely comfortable and confident saying what I have to say, and that's it. If you don't agree, then I don't care. You understand? So that type of thing that can be mass produced, right? And I want that to be mass produced. I don't want whatever you feel that I am. I don't want that to be a rare thing 50 years from now. I want that to be a very common thing. Like I want there to be like a million versions of people like us that are just like, if you don't like it, that's what it's going to be. And we're sturdy. We stand on our own 2 feet. We educate our own. We take care of ourselves. We're going to be okay. We don't need whatever you got, right? Sturdy Black people. That's it. That's my 2 cents. I hope you heard my point. I kept reiterating it because I really wanted you to understand. I felt very passionate about it. And I apologize if I got a little redundant toward the end, but I think that's really important. So go do that with your kids. Make them sturdy and then just prepare them for battle. And I guarantee you, as strong as we are and as capable as we are, we can't lose. They can't kill us, man. We're too strong. We're too, when we're really focused, we can't be defeated ever. So we will win. I know that. All right. So I'm going to go. Powernomics.com is where you can get Dr. Anderson's books. Again, the holidays are coming. So, I hope you'll go make it rain on his website because I think these would be great Christmas gifts. You guys know at my wedding, I gave away a bunch of Powernomics books. And so I think that's the best gift you can give any Black person is Dr. Anderson's ideas. It's very liberating. Also, if you want to see like the recordings of the convention and all that stuff, and join us for All Black Digital, where we're going to redo the convention and bring back every panel all through the year. Go to allblackdigital.com. There's also recordings from the previous conventions and stuff like that. So it's allblackdigital.com. That's allblackdigital.com. Also, on that link I gave you at allblacknationalconvention.com, you can actually, if you want to prepare for the convention next year, feel free to order tickets in advance. And that helps you because it secures your spot, but it also helps us because it allows us to plan and go ahead and put deposits down and all that stuff. It's a lot of work to do a convention. I've never done anything like this before, but God told me to do it, so I got to follow what God tells me to do. Period. You got to be, whatever it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to do something hard, I encourage you to be spiritual, because when you're spiritual and you just kind of know you're doing the right thing, you listen to your instincts and nothing scares you. So don't be scared. Move forward. You can do it. Whatever it is in your life you're trying to do, you can do it. All right, guys, I'm about to get out of here. Have a good night. I'm going to go hang out with my kids. I'll see y'all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.